In this video, Jordan Peterson explains how just or unjust is the distribution of wealth.
If you're absolutely egalitarian in your orientation, then you have to make the presumption that all differences in hierarchical status are fundamentally unjust. If you're absolutely hierarchical in your orientation, then you have to make the assumption that the distribution of resources that obtains currently is a consequence of justice. Right? The people at the top deserve to be there and the people at the bottom deserve to be there. Now, as we've already discussed, the situation is complicated by the fact that there seems to be some truth in both claims, insofar as conscientiousness and intelligence predict long-term socioeconomic status, and that conscientiousness and intelligence seem to be associated quite strongly with competence, then the degree to which they predict social status seems to indicate that the structure is just. The fact that people are brought down the dominance hierarchy for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with their intrinsic competence or their willingness to engage in productive activity weakens the conservative argument, because there are certainly cases where the distribution of resources can be seen to be fundamentally unjust. I think one of the things that happens with political belief is that you can think about political beliefs as heuristics, and heuristics are unconscious rules. They're really algorithms that people use to address large sets of data to simplify them so that they're not drowning in complexity. The system is just. Well, that's a simplification. It means there's all sorts of things that you don't have to think about. The system is unjust is a heuristic oversimplification as well. And it means that you don't have to think your way through the complexities of the actual topic that you're dealing with. And what seems to be happening is that the temperamental factors that we've discussed, so to speak, reflect the use of heuristics that are grounded deeply in motivation and emotion. The two dimensions, resistance to change and tolerance of inequality, appear roughly aligned with social and economic conservatism, as expressed in the constructs of right-wing authoritarianism and social dominance orientation, respectively. The core facets of conservatism are also closely related to the two higher-order value dimensions described in moral foundations theory, which reflect preference for order and tradition on the one hand, and preference for egalitarianism on the other. Importantly, the motivational basis of these two dimensions appears to vary independently from one another, with an individual's overall political attitudes on a right-left spectrum emerging from their relative balance. These motives are also strongly rooted in basic personality characteristics, such that preferences for order and tradition are associated with higher levels of orderliness, not industriousness, and politeness, which is an aspect of agreeableness, as well as with lower levels of openness and intellect. In contrast, preferences for egalitarianism are uniquely associated with compassion, an aspect of agreeableness. Political conservatism can be thought of as a social immune system, reflecting the extension of pathogen avoidance mechanisms to the integrity of the social system. So the idea there, the metaphorical idea, look, if you're egalitarian, everyone's a big family. That's the core metaphor. I think that's part of the reason that women are more agreeable than men. They're more compassionate than men. And it's necessary for them to be more compassionate than men because they have the obligation or opportunity to concern themselves with the egalitarian distribution of resources within the family unit. If you're orderly, the fundamental metaphor doesn't seem to be family. The fundamental metaphor seems to be body and the purity of the body. And the vulnerability of the body, that's another element of it. Just as the behavioral immune system has been conceptualized as helping to maintain the purity and integrity of an individual body, so too may the same pathogen avoidance system help to maintain the abstract integrity of the social order. We don't call our society a body of laws for nothing. We also tend to symbolize countries as people. So you can say things like England took steps to, or France recently decided to. And so there's the idea that each state can be represented as a body. You could also say that a hereditary monarch, like Queen Elizabeth, is such a powerful figure because she embodies in her actual being the concept of the state. The state is a body. It's actually a body of laws, and insofar as you are bound by that body of laws, you're all acting out the same body because you're mimicking the same set of principles that describe the way that you orient your behavior and your perception. So these are archetypal metaphors. That's one way of thinking about it, and they have consequences. The social immune system would help to maintain order by suppressing any actions or individuals that deviate from a group's accepted social traditions. If the cells in your body deviate enough from the traditions of the other cells, then what you develop is cancer. So there's this idea, it's not only an idea, there's this fundamental reality that a certain amount of stability and safety is to be held in obedience to a structure of authority. It has been reported that regions with higher levels of disease prevalence tend to be associated with higher levels of social conformity and autocratic rule. Individuals who feel more vulnerable to disease likewise report higher levels of ethnocentrism and xenophobia. One of the things we do know about socioeconomic status is that people who are lower on the socioeconomic hierarchy are more disgust sensitive. Now, the reasons for that aren't exactly clear because people on the lower end of the socioeconomic distribution on average also tend to have lower IQs. And lower IQs are associated with increased disgust sensitivity. So there's the confounding effect of intelligence. But by the same token, if you're at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy, you are more prone to infectious disease because you're stressed and vulnerable. So there's real reasons for you to be careful about what you expose yourself to if you're just clinging on to the bottom of the hierarchy with both hands or with one hand. Such basic concerns about pathogen avoidance may thus contribute to the desire for order and tradition among conservatives, along with the harsh moral judgments associated with violations of the social order. Because one of the things that's not easy to understand, is like you see this a lot in the United States, where the attraction of Republican politics isn't limited to those at the top of the socioeconomic ladder. In fact, the Republicans draw tremendous support from people who are in the lower strata of the socioeconomic hierarchy, even though it seems quite clear by some standards that the policies that the Republicans promote are not policies that are going to help people who are at the bottom of the socioeconomic distribution if they stay there. Now, you could argue that the reason that the poor Republicans support the Republicans is because they see themselves as able to climb the hierarchy, and so they're voting their dream and not their reality. But you could also make a case, I believe, that the people at the bottom of the hierarchy are already so stressed that if you add more variability into the system, then that increases the probability that they're going to be completely overwhelmed by chaos. And the more stressed they are, the higher the probability that they're going to suffer ill health for one reason or another. So perhaps part of the reason for the desire to maintain social integrity, even if you're at the bottom of the heap, is because some order is better than none, especially if you're already stressed to your limit.